Time for Boring Talk with your host, Patrick Race. Filmed live on tape.
Are we good to go? Okay, so welcome Beth Kerttula.
Thanks.
Former representative.
Former.
So this is a segment that we are going to call Boring Talk, and I really don't know what it is yet, but I think it's going to be a just sort of a casual, conversational, like a chance to expand on some of the things that we're doing with our satire program, but for us to learn more about different issues and different people, but also for us to get some more depth. Because I feel like a lot of what we're doing with the satire is really, it's limited in what it can get at.
Although really important and really wonderful, and humor can get so much more across. So sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, and I think but I do think there's kind of like a balance between the two. I think it's important to have like real conversations and not just make jokes about everything. And so yeah, I wanted to invite you in and just kind of chat. And I think you're in a really unique position. Having just resigned from the legislature, you have, what did we decide? It was 15 years that you'd served?
15 years and 1 day.
So that's incredible, and going out the door on that must be incredibly emotional, and can you just share some of what that's been like for you?
It is very hard, but it's also been really humbling and wonderful at the same time. I mean, you know, the speaker canceled the majority, the Republicans' press conference the day that I resigned, and held one with me instead, so we could just talk about service and, you know, how to make things work better, and about the fact that even though we might not ever vote together, we did actually a lot. A lot of things are not controversial, but so even if we didn't vote together, we were still friends and could work together, and that was actually lovely. And the community has been really wonderful and really positive about my being able to take advantage of the new opportunity, even though I'm leaving midterm, which is it's really hard to do. And my father, who also served, was really not for me doing that, because to him, you were elected, you serve, that's it. But you know, he also supports me. He's my dad, so it's just hard. There were some last moments. You know, anytime you make a big shift like this, there are things that you realize you're going to do for the last time. And that's hard, you know, walking out the door of the Capitol building, where I really literally grew up much of my life and then have served for 15 years. That's just emotional. It's just a hard thing to do, to leave people behind. But it's tempered by the community support I've got, by the excitement I have of getting to go study ocean issues, which I love, and then also by the fact that I'm coming home in 2 years. I mean, if this were it, I can't imagine how emotional that would be. If I were leaving my home for good, you know, and so I think about a lot of people who did things like that. This is going to be a lot easier than that.
And I know last session was really frustrating for you. It was pretty emotional, and you know, there's not just Senate Bill 21, but there's a lot going on last session. And I was wondering, do you feel more like you're moving towards an opportunity, or do you feel like there's a part of you that's like kind of moving away from what happened? You
know, I think when anybody serves for a long period of time, or you do a job for a long period of time, that there comes a point for some of us where you realize it's time. Max Grunberg and I, Max really the dean of the legislature at this point, because he served with my dad, had a hiatus and came back. But Max and I talked about it, and he said, you know, you kind of know when it's time. And for me, I would have much preferred to have finished my term, because that's what you do. But for me, yeah, that time came. It was time for me to do something else and let others take over. And that's democracy, and that's healthy. I would have preferred to have, no, I've said it. But yes, I think that's right. There's a point of saying it's time to leave. And there's also, for me, it's also just incredibly fortunate to also have something wonderful to go toward.
Yeah. I think I've been asking a lot of people about it. I think there are a lot of people that were pretty surprised that you resigned when you did. But they seem to be pretty understanding on the whole. Like, and I've talked to a lot of conservative folks and a lot of people that are definitely like more liberal and in your camp, and everyone seems pretty understanding of it. There are a few people that are feeling a little bit let down, but for the most part, you've got a lot of support. And I was wondering, why do you think you have so much of that support when, obviously there's comparisons to Sarah Palin. When she left midterm, people went bananas. And what do you think is different about this?
I think, well, I hope I look a little like her. There's a good comparison to her. On the one hand, there's not much of a comparison, really, even in terms of the service with Governor Palin. First of all, she was governor, so it was the entire state. I'm a representative, but I don't want to downgrade my service, and 15 years is different than 2 years.
Yeah.
And being minority leader is a big job, but I leave the leadership in strong hands with Chris Tuck from Anchorage and with a very good caucus and a strongly united caucus. And I leave the Tongass district, as we call it now, District 32, from Petersburg to Skagway, including Juneau, I leave it in good hands because there's so many qualified people. If I were leaving without a strong leader and a strong caucus and without good people to take my place, that would be, I think, much different. So I think people understand that after 15 years of and maybe I work really, really hard, and I really, really love the work, and I think people understand that. I think they know I would not do this if it weren't for an amazing opportunity at my school that I went as an undergrad, and then something that I've worked so hard on for so long. I guess all of those things came together, but mostly, really, we just live in a wonderful community, and people do support each other to do wonderful things, and so I'm really lucky.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Stanford. So you have this big opportunity in front of you. What is that? Can you explain that a little bit?
Right. It's a visiting fellowship, and I don't know all of the things that are going to happen during it, but part of it is I'll be giving some lectures. I've been approached already to be on a panel studying Arctic issues, and I'll get to take classes and understand things better. That's my big goal, is I'm really interested in ocean issues, and I want to understand it better.
Do you have to take PE?
That would be good for me. There's a goal. A goal is to get in better physical shape.
Do you know what classes you're going to take, though?
I don't. I think that some of them, I know that the woman who's the executive director is from the law school, so I'm really interested in hearing more about the law of the sea and understanding more of the legal issues around what's going to happen, for instance, in the Arctic. And I'm also really interested in bringing policymakers to Stanford, and also being a bridge between Alaska and Stanford so that we can bring some of our wonderful climatologists. I mean, we have the leading edge climate people sitting at UAF. And I mean, we have, some of Terry Chapin, Gary Kafinas, John Walsh. Those guys are world class. They help write those world reports on climate change. Well, I want to get them so that they have that interchange with Stanford. And then really, as a just freshly former legislator, I want to put together model legislation for the West Coast so that legislators don't have to do all that work themselves, because it's really hard. And here in Alaska, in a 90-day session, almost impossible to get the kind of information, put it together in a meaningful piece of legislation, and track down the people to testify and do all of that in short sessions. Yeah. So my goal is to do those kinds of things for them.
So you're like a liaison.
It's a liaison kind of a situation, and I think that they were looking for somebody that, spoke legislator and
legislatees.
Yeah, legislatees, and I think that will be really fun, and it's a goal I've always had, is to bring more science into the legislature.
That sounds really exciting.
It is.
Now, the last year or so, we've had, you guys have been facing like a supermajority, right? And so it must have been hard. It must have been a little bit of an uphill push to try and get things passed. And when you talk about stuff like ocean policy, that's probably not like their number one priority of the majority right now. What do you think is on the radar for the future? Like, how do you see that evolving?
Well, Of course, one of the funny things is, you know, I talk about this and my goal of legislation even, and my caucus will say to me, "Oh, that's wonderful," and it'll never get passed. Yeah. But I'm a real optimist, and I've seen things happen. I used to watch my father put in legislation. He worked 10 years on the state's antitrust law. I think it was the antitrust bill. I could be corrected on how long it took, but anyway. I've seen some pieces of his legislation take a long, long time to get passed. So I figure, you know, this is a start. Alaska is an ocean state. We have, you know, half of the entire country's coastline. The movement in the Arctic is critical for the world in reality. What happens there will affect the world. The fisheries, we have still the greatest natural run of salmon in Bristol Bay for the entire world. And to get to be part of understanding those issues and hopefully making a positive change is something that I think will appeal to Alaskan legislators, and that the more information I can give them, the better. And I know we can debate about the issues all day long, but I think sooner or later information and truth win out and we all do better. And so my goal is just to, like you said, liaise or be a conduit or even start to understand it better myself. I had the great pleasure of having good relationships with almost everyone in the legislature, and no matter what the party. And while we didn't always agree, I felt that almost all of us could sit down and, you know, talk to each other and understand each other. And although in the House, you know, the supermajority exists, there's still moments where we rise above ourselves and the partisanship and act together, and those are good moments. And so I hope I get to be part of just bringing information home, saying these are things that make sense, here's why, and also to not just Alaska but in other states, going to them and saying, what do you want? What do you need so that you can do a better job with your ocean? Not everyone wants to see good things and success for the ocean. But how we do that is something I don't understand even yet. So it's that rare moment in life when you get to go hopefully be part of something wonderful.
Yeah. I think salmon is a really interesting resource in Alaska. I feel like it's very much a bridge issue where it, especially like you've seen it recently with the Pebble Mine, where you see this economic incentive align itself with an environmental incentive, and
that's right.
It feels like you have all of a sudden there's this this greater will to, like, oh, we need to look at ocean acidification, or we need to look at whatever it is that ties into that salmon's life cycle, because the salmon is so much a part of our identity up here in Alaska. I mean, not just our identity, but like our culture and our history, and and so it's really interesting to see that push against other economic incentives. And I feel like that's kind of an interesting issue as a way to start bridging some of those gaps between people's different philosophies.
I think that's exactly right. I think that not only will I hopefully get to bring, you know, Stanford to Alaska, but also bring what's happening in Alaska to Stanford in a real personal way. And, you know, just I think about the salmon. I've been thinking about just feeding people salmon there, you know, how I'm going to bring fish down and help people understand how critical it is. And as you say, it's our culture, it's our identity, it's what I like to eat the most. And that's a really, I don't even know how you explain that as a physical, spiritual, it's sort of the whole thing with the salmon. But we've got to get across, and we've got to overcome these sort of rhetorical walls that we bump up against in terms of saying that something is just environmental or that something is just development, and kind of really step back and understand what the situation is. And I think that happened and is happening with Pebble and with the salmon. And that people, as you say, they're understanding it's sort of the whole picture. It's not even just the salmon, it's not just a way of life, it is the economics, and it is Alaska.
It becomes a much more complex issue when you start weighing all those things. And it's very hard to say just yes or no. And, it's very hard to make it a black and white thing.
It is. And one of the pieces of my background that's really once you start working in this particular area, I don't think you ever get away from it. At least none of my friends, nor I have. And that's coastal zone and coastal zone management.
Right, which they shut down a few years back.
Which we lost. We lost in the legislature by 1 vote. And maybe if I got asked what the hardest thing was that I ever saw in the legislature, that's
why
one of
Beth?
them.
What is the hardest thing?
If I were asked. That was one of them. Losing the coastal zone management program was one of the hardest things that I ever went through, although there were arguments that the program as it was at that moment had so many deficits that we had to start over. But really at the heart of coastal zone management is the idea that you work in a holistic manner to take into account the coastline, the impacts on the coastline and the people to try to make development work. When I was the coastal zone lawyer at the AG's office for 5 years, I remember thousands of permits coming through for development projects that impacted the coast and only 4 or 5 being totally rejected. The whole objective was how do you make things work? And there were a few things that just should never have happened, and they didn't happen.
And my understanding of that program was that it was designed to try and give local people more input into what's happening on their coastline and their communities.
Right, in a meaningful way. It was infrequent, as I said, that something could be altogether stopped, but it was frequent that what happened is people could sit together, really literally at a table, and with government people and local people and people who were impacted, and talk about a project. And really what would happen is people would say, well, you've got an outfall right here. If you move that over 200 feet, then you're not going to impact the stream. It was really simple things like that that just get worked out when you actually talk to each other. It also had the beauty of coordinating, which brought, a lot of permits together into one place, which made things much easier and things worked more smoothly. And finally, the program was set up to give states a method to be able to impact the federal government, so that if you had a federal activity happening, the state could actually have a direct say in that. Right. So all of those things were lost. I think eventually coastal zone management, we tried with an initiative that didn't work, although we won the moral victory and won the coastal vote was there. But I think eventually something like coastal zone management, or it will come back, because we need the centralization of permitting. People deserve a direct voice in what's happening that impacts their lives, and just because it's kind of common sense. It got all blown up, it became very political, and of course now Alaska is the only coastal state in the nation without a coastal zone program.
I thought that was a really interesting thing when it was going to vote. They did a really good job of making it like a kind of a muddy, complicated issue, and I felt like that was the strategy in that was like, well, no one could really understand it, so why would we want to vote for that? And like, it's been interesting as an outsider to just sort of see the strategies play out and see how people try to make their decisions. Are there a lot of like strategic meetings and things that people have along the way, or does this kind of just evolve organically?
Well, I'd like to say that there's a lot of strategy. It's a mix.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't want to over-strategize, right? I see people who do that. Yeah. They over-strategize, and then when something happens over here, they're just lost.
Because
they don't know what to
it.
do. Yeah, it's like their strategy tells them they're going this way. And I mean, we all get caught there sometimes, but it also, to the extent that you can think things through. I mean, maybe just I don't know. I'm a big planner, right?
Yeah.
But I will tell you something that my mother taught me just recently. My mom's 90, going to be 91, one of the most wonderful and intelligent and funny people I know. And my mother at 91, we took her to the airport, but then because she flew to Mexico, we couldn't even go to the gate with her. So my mom at 91...
You just sent her off to Mexico?
Got on the plane. She went to Mexico. My sister met her.
Okay.
I mean, it's not...
I was like, bye, Mom.
Bye, Mom.
I'm going to Stanford. You're going to have to go to Mexico.
I'm going to Stanford. You go to Mexico. Yeah. We'll hear from you later. No. But when she... Okay, so I'm a planner. So I was worrying about every single detail. Like, my mom doesn't speak Spanish. Well, I need to have everything written out in Spanish. So I'm faxing things to my sister at midnight the night before my mom leaves so she can translate. And, you know, it's all getting kind of hyper. And my mother finally looked at me and she said, Beth, I don't plan for the worst possible thing to happen, right? And I realized that's what I was doing. I was planning for, you know, the worst possible thing. And, you know, that has really helped me, and it helped me in the last week leave the legislature, because I really started planning for the best possible thing to happen, and it has. It's been wonderful. And so I encourage people to let go a little bit if they're like me.
I do kind of like that Boy Scout motto, though, of the, you know, plan for the worst, hope for the best, that kind of thing.
Just don't overdo it like I can do.
Yeah, if you start obsessing with the worst possible outcome.
The obsessive, up at midnight faxing, that's not a good thing to do. But the planning, that's probably smart. So
I'm actually curious, have you put a lot of thought into the governor's race this year at all?
I have.
Because that's something that, like, from the kind of the armchair quarterback position, it's been interesting to see that start to develop. It's just kind of in the early stages, but we've got, you know, Parnell and Walker and Malott, and those are kind of the three big names that are in the race right now.
Right.
And it feels like what I'm seeing is that you've got Sean Parnell kind of on one side and Malott on the other side, and they're kind of in this game of pushing Walker back and forth and trying to align him with the opposite side so that he'll take more votes from them. So, I mean, I saw Parnell came out with something that oh, yeah, Bill Walker is very much like Byron Malott, and he's over here on this side of this issue. And I feel like that's kind of the game now, is to, like, push this guy in the middle back and forth.
And in some ways, they might be smart to say, you know, Bill Walker's like me. he's done some really interesting and important things to encourage gas development in Alaska. So. But yeah, I think that's right. There is that give and take. It's, you know, it's one of those things where it's really so early. It's hard to see how it's all going to play out that way. I think one thing is that the referendum on SB 21, which I am so hopeful that it will pass and we can pull back from the brink of disaster with the oil tax. I think that's going to be very important. And I think that will bring out a lot of people in the primary, because that's sort of the harbinger about what's going to happen next. And I have fear about that, because the oil industry, you know, it's pretty easy to spend a couple $2 billion on that campaign if it means that oil tax, which gives you $2 billion a year, stays in place. So I worry about that. And I saw what happened in Coastal Zone firsthand. You know, we had, I can't remember the exact amount, but we were outspent 10-1 easily. So I think that Byron Malott brings such a wide and broad background to the table that I think once people start to get to know him and understand where he could lead us, I think that there will be such a positive upswelling that he stands a tremendous chance, and I hope he will win and become governor and be the nation's first Native American to be governor, which is really a tremendous thing, and it would be very fitting for Alaska. But that completely aside, you know, head of the Permanent Fund, head of Sea Alaska, tremendous background in business, and just a really all-around good person. He could do such a great job, but it's really early on. Bill Walker, it's an interesting issue, and you know, where does he wind up at the end of the day? Whose votes does he actually take? Does that really matter? That's hard to gauge.
As I understand it, isn't that kind of how Tony Knowles ended up winning? There was a very strong independent, and that took a lot of the votes away from the Republican candidate, and I think that was the last time we had a Democrat governor.
Yeah, as far as I remember, it is.
Because it was Tony and then Frank, and But
yeah, that was a lot.
I don't know.
Of
it's always fun to just kind of like look at that stuff. But actually, you mentioned Senate Bill 21, and I'd really be interested in talking about that a little bit because I know that's an issue that you were right on top of, and I guess maybe if we could kind of go through how that unfolded a little bit, like.
Yeah. When Sarah Palin was governor, it's sort of an irony of life. She actually aligned much more with Democrats on the issue in the oil tax. I think some of that is because her husband worked on the North Slope, and she was not afraid to stand up on that issue. And she brought in people on her team, both on the oil tax and on gas line issues, that many of us had worked with for a long time. And a great commissioner, Tom Irwin at DNR, great guy, knowledgeable, had helped, started Fort Knox, started the big mining, in Fairbanks, so understood a lot what it took to do a big project. Marty Rutherford, who, she's a little older, but who I grew up with and who had been at DNR a long time working on oil and gas issues. Pat Galvin, who actually worked at Coastal Zone and then went on to be Commissioner of Revenue. Anyway, Governor Palin and that team put together a profits tax, which is different from what Alaska had gross tax, where we had a bunch of deductions and worked things out differently. They brought in a profits tax, and I went there kicking and screaming. I was really worried about what would happen with the deductions and credits and how things would really work. But at the end of the day, because they also brought in a team of really world-renowned experts, and because we had open access to them. I mean, I sat in my office and talked to many of their experts one-on-one and was able to just ask every single question I had. And because of the virtue of my having been an oil and gas lawyer and done pipeline tariff cases at the AG's office, I had a pretty fundamental understanding of some of the issues. So I came to the point where at the end of the day I thought we should try. We should go ahead and do it. And my caucus and the Senate, Senator French in particular, leading on the issue, we went for it. And we were incredibly fortunate because we turned to a profits tax with something we call progressivity, and that meant we gained a little more on the high side, well, a lot more, and I can talk a little bit more about that later. When oil prices spike and go up, Alaskans got more of the profit. Right. And that seemed fair to me.
So instead of oil prices going up and the oil companies profiting and the state's still making the same, it's everyone
we went up
gets a little bit more.
Right. We encouraged new development, which proved true. We did see new development and new companies on the slope. But we need to do that. The monopoly hold is not a healthy situation for Alaskans' future. And that's fundamental economics. But we did something on that. And we also did progressivity, which gave us more money on the highest side of oil. Well, oil went up, and we benefited tremendously. Mm-hmm. And the reason we have had really high capital budgets to build across the state in the last years has been because of the ACES oil tax. Now, were there some issues with ACES? Yeah, there were. There were some mathematical anomalies that I've talked to Senator Stedman, I think might have been the first guy to really kind of figure this all out, and his concern about that, and I share that. That needs to be fixed. And then there are some also concerns, which even at the time as it was going through, my caucus had about what happens if the companies can build those credits up to the point where they're taking too many deductions. And for the first couple of years, we actually had a level on that. That actually my caucus is the one that
on deductions.
It was like that. We called it a standard deduction. It worked more like a cap, but we had that on, and it saved the state $700 million.
And the way that works is that when you're talking about gross revenue, you're talking about the number that's at the bottom of the sheet before you factor in anything else. And then when you're talking about net, you're talking about profits. And so you can always take out, like, oh, we bought a wrench, or we need to buy this. And so what you write off is really kind of up to the oil companies, and that's private information?
In some cases that's right. And what we did to stop that concern is we had, as you say, it's really worked as a cap. At any rate, that sunsetted though,
Yeah.
so we didn't get to keep that on. And now we do have the problem of seeing those rising costs. That has affected the state's take. Okay, so now I've gone into way too much detail.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, what happened with SB 21 is it just all sort of went out the window. And probably the biggest key in my heart, the biggest problem is, well, there's two things. The first thing is progressivity is lost. So if oil spikes up, Alaskans don't benefit as they should. You know, the companies will argue that they're in Alaska because of that. They could gain on the high side. Those companies make money at low oil prices. They do not deserve nor need to have all of the high side. And Alaskans absolutely deserve it. It's our oil, and it's almost, in my mind, like a windfall. So nobody can predict, really, that. But because there's progressivity, it balances out the other things that happen in the tax. We have to encourage new production. Production is down.
So the oil company's argument is that if they come in and invest in this, like we're going to invest in a project, and we're taking this huge risk by investing in this project, and if it pays off, we want it to really pay off.
Right.
And that's kind of the argument?
That's a good way to say it, and it sounds kind of rational. Where it starts to fall apart is that the companies have gained tremendously and will continue to gain tremendously in Alaska. They have fixed sunk costs already, a pipeline that's paid for. They don't pay anything really more except upkeep on the pipeline, and they have a monopoly hold on the North Slope. So they benefit tremendously from Alaska. They don't need to take all of the upside to benefit and continue to benefit tremendously. Second part of the new oil tax that really causes me a lot of concern is there's a very poorly written section of the bill, and now law, that deals with how you give benefit to what they call new oil. And the problem is it's reminiscent of a really old law that we had that was called the economic limit factor, the ELF. You'll hear about that. And you probably have a few. You should have elves running around right now, the table, little elves. Anyway, that was similarly written to try to encourage new production, new fields, and it resulted in a situation where some of the best producing oil fields in the nation on the North Slope were paying almost or no tax. And this section has that kind of capability to undermine the whole tax and result in almost all of our oil being called new oil so that it benefits from this huge tax break on a tax break. Right. So
oil that's already has already been developed, and they're going to call that new oil.
Because of the way the statute's written, and because it's, my dad used to call some things lazy law. We commented, you know, pages and pages of comments about this, but that was my main concern. The law was so poorly written, it left it all up to the Department of Revenue, and they're going to have a terrible struggle. They did have a terrible struggle, and we commented and said, you just have to be extremely careful about this, because at the end of the day, if you wind up in a situation where the company can argue it's all new, then the state has just lost tremendous revenue.
Yeah. So something we didn't talk about is when you're talking about ACEs, one of the things that I feel like, and I may be wrong here, but one of the things I feel really catapulted that into existence is the whole VECO scandal. And I feel like that we would not have ended up with ACEs.
Or Sarah Palin.
Yeah,
maybe.
If we hadn't had that whole VECO scandal. I mean, it was kind of a pivotal point in Alaska history. And you and I talked about this
A terrible
before.
Day.
You said you were the only legislator in the Capitol building when the feds came in, right?
Right, because of being Juneau's, then it was just downtown Juneau Douglas as representative. I was in the building, and I did go to my office, and I was going to say I do, but I often am in my office during the interim. Yeah. So I was in the building the day that the FBI raided the Capitol and came in with the banker boxes and went into people's offices and just took all their documents, took their hard drives, served the subpoena. It was
wild.
Yeah, it was wild and it was horrible. maybe I don't like the coastal zone vote, but that was the bleakest moment. I mean, it was absolutely surreal. I felt it just was sickening seeing that happen.
As that unraveled and things came out about that, was there anything that you were really particularly surprised by?
Oh, yeah. I felt it was horrifying, you know, seeing people accepting bribes and selling the state out. It was horrifying. Yeah, it just was terrible. And it was surprising. It's hard to believe people would do that. You just...
Because these are people you work with every day.
These are people you work with. It's people that you have a working relationship with, that you in general like as humans, even if you don't agree with them. And it's just, yeah, it's still, it hurts, and it's still shocking to me that they did some of the things that they did.
Yeah, it felt like the general sentiment among the population was that, like, we're surprised but not surprised. Do you feel like that kind of atmosphere or style of doing business was, like, prevalent up there, or is that?
You know, I got brought up in this and have watched it for a long time and then was in. I can tell you the bill that came, the tax law that was in place before ACES, the PPT, you know, the night that it was going across the floor was this incredible pressure night, and I didn't even get up and out of my seat on breaks because people were lining the hallway, and there was so much pressure on the votes, many amendments, many weird things happening. And I was tracking the voting on the amendments because I was the whip at that point, and Ethan Berkowitz was a leader. I didn't see this happen, but I know at one point a note got passed across the balustrade, which is completely forbidden. You, at an ease, you could talk to a legislator, but you cannot send a note onto the floor. And in fact, I remembered as a kid, my dad closed the galleries, and I don't remember what it was, but it happened when my father was presiding officer, and he closed the galleries and said, "That's it, everybody's out.
Wow.
We're taking this vote." You know, it's on record, but people were gone, so that couldn't happen. But that kind of craziness, the notes across the balustrade, the lobbyists in the hallway, and then people changing their votes in really weird ways that I didn't understand. I couldn't understand why these things were happening. Well, John, the presiding officer took a call when we were still in session, something also I've never seen before or since, and that was kind of it. You know, Ethan got up, and it's one of those moments I'm really proud of having been there at that moment, because Ethan got up and he said, "This is our house. This is the people of the state of Alaska's house. This has got to stop. You know, you can't be doing things like this." And I was so proud of him. So in retrospect, what I figure is this. I feel like if a lot of things are happening that you don't understand, then probably things are not going very well.
Yeah.
And that night, I think there was corruption. And to have to say that about a body that I love so dearly.
Well, there definitely was. I mean, people went to jail.
People went to jail. People were convicted. And it's just, see, again, you just, it's so hard to even accept that it all happened. But that's the point. It's to realize that those kinds of things can happen, and to try to build the safeguards so those kinds of things never happen again. I don't like it.
Do you feel like those safeguards have been built?
No, I don't. I really don't. I think that part of the problem for Alaska is you have a very quick session, a 90-day session, where people don't get the, as much time as really necessary to understand the legislation or to comment on it or to be part of it. I don't think that's about location. I think that's about the telecommunications and the thoughtful process that should happen.
And just the time to read everything.
Right, the time to read everything, the time to be able to comment, the time to work through. I think it puts a tremendous pressure on legislators. It means that you start off like that and it keeps going. And I think really it's not going to be the same as it was, I hope, ever again, that the VECO scandal can never replay. But it's more of a not being able to understand, to go too fast, and to then make mistakes. It's that kind of a problem that I think we have more now.
No, you say that like that VECO scandal can never replay, but there's nothing that's really changed, right? Like,
Well,
I mean, aside from the name of a business? Or?
No, from one thing, we've all been through it once. And having gone through it, people are much more aware. For another thing, you know, we've got the state agencies that are supposed to be regulating and that they've been through it. But in reality, really, the thing that has to happen is, you know, people just have to be watchful.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be sort of, it's the culture, right?
It is the culture.
It's the culture of the building.
It is the culture. It's exactly right.
People's decorum and that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's just really, it's really interesting to me. Did the state do anything about that, or did it all come from the federal level?
You know, I think it was all federal.
Yeah. So if something like that happened again, we'd really be dependent on the federal government coming in and taking care of the problem?
You know, I hope not. I mean, there are a lot of jurisdictional reasons why it all stayed federal. And then unfortunately, you know, you unfortunately had the, you know, other problems within the federal prosecution, and especially Senator Stevens, which just, you know, it's almost abhorrent what happened on the other side. So that's another lesson to hopefully never see anything like that happen ever again either.
Yeah, it was a fiasco. I just feel like I feel like that's a part of our history that we don't talk about enough.
It's difficult to talk about it, but you're probably right. We should talk about it and say it was a terrible time, that we all need to do better about not ever allowing anything like that to happen again.
Yeah.
I worry, I'll tell you something though I worry about more. I worry about the effect of Citizens United and the fact that huge amounts of money can come into campaigns from corporations now. And I feel like as an American, that's something we should all work to stop. I really don't think that entities that can't vote should be able to do that.
Is that something that we could do something about on a state level?
Well, we've tried, and I don't understand that well enough. You should talk to Bill Wilikowski and some of the guys who have legislation on that. Yes, I think there is. But I think overall it really should be the entire country.
Mm-hmm. Is that like a partisan issue, or is that something that Democrats feel more strongly? Or is
I think in Alaska it's a little bit been more on the Democratic side. I think nationally it's probably not that partisan.
Because I've heard in talking to like more conservative-minded folks that they say like all this money's coming in from the unions, and when I talk to more liberal-minded folks, they say all this money's coming in from big business, and so it's really interesting to like money is a problem no matter what side you're on, and it does
follow
seem,
the money kind of but, that's right.
But not
you're
just
right.
like the money has a voice, money has a will, and when there's a lot of money behind something, it's influential, and so I think trying to limit money's influence is not a bad goal for either side, as long as it's done in a way that's fair to both sides, and I think that's the concern.
I think that's absolutely right. And I guess also to back up and say it's not always wrong. It's not always wrong for money to be in. It's just that when it's too much money and it's not as well accounted for as it should be, that's a problem.
Right. So if you have, if the money is more important than the debate, than the conversation,
then that's a problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, are there any other things that you like want to reflect on here? I guess as you're going out the door. I don't.
Yeah, don't let the door hit you.
No. But I mean, like you've been up there so long, and you've been involved in some really important issues, and you have a lot of respect from people on both sides of the aisle, and you've. I was shocked when I came up and you had your bottle of wine that Mike Hawker had brought by for you. I was like, that's a really sweet gesture.
I gave to Mike Hawker, and the fact that he hung on to it for so long, and I'm going to have to wait to drink it with him because we're not going to get the time before I get on the plane. But see, that's the thing. Okay, so my overall philosophy is this: I think you argue on the issues, you work as hard as you can, you make the case as hard as you can, and you stay away from personalities. Because the same person that you're arguing against today is going to be your strongest ally tomorrow. Mike and I might be a good example of that. We are not going to agree on almost all oil tax issues. But we have worked together really well on other issues, have even co-authored pieces of legislation together. So you just have to be willing to understand that your person you're arguing against today is your friend tomorrow. But moreover, we're all Alaskans. And we all want to see this state do well, I think, and they would say the same of me. Some of them, you know, are wrong on the issues, maybe misguided, but again, somehow I've been really fortunate to be friends with most of the people there, and I think that really is, in my opinion, is the way to get things done and to work together. Does it mean that sometimes I get angry and I just get up and start fighting back really hard? Yeah, I've had those moments. And I think there are times when that's what you have to do. You have to be strong enough to be able to know that there are times when it's just over and all you can do is fight. But mostly, you try to understand the other person so that you can work together for something good. There are certain issues that are critical for Alaska. We've talked quite a bit about the oil issues, the gas line. You know, I want to say this. We are closer at this point to getting a gas line than we have probably ever been. And I feel positive about the step forward on at least starting to discuss an equity interest for Alaskans to actually have a part of this pipeline. There's going to be details that have to be worked on. This legislature is going to be working on those details. But I feel good that we are at a point where at least we're this far ahead and show some promise on the horizon. That's a good thing. We're, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, is that a pretty big leap? Like that,
that's a big leap.
Like that we are discussing an equity interest in the pipeline when just last session I feel like people were talking about how we couldn't develop our own this, that, and other thing. And so, and now all of a sudden we're talking about actually having a stake in a project. You know, I mean, last session we were talking about oil taxes, the issue of you know, like nationalization of oil into other countries and things like that came up, and people were like, Alaska can't do this, Alaska can't have a stake in these projects, Alaska can't, and now, you know, 12 months later, we're talking about how we should have up to a quarter, like 25% share in this stake in this project. We should roll up our sleeves and build. It's
a really interesting point, and it's a complex one. And you know, how we do that and how we use TransCanada in particular to manage our share and then buy in or take it over ourselves, all of those things are going to have to actually be worked out. It's not going to be easy. But the fact that we're having the conversation is terrific. It's just a great step forward in Alaska's history. I mean, you know, they talked about it with the pipeline, and of course that was socialism. They couldn't get it to work out together when the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was built. It would have been much better for Alaska had we really owned and been on the inside, understanding what was happening with that tariff over the years. I think we would have saved Alaskans billions. But Alaska is a resource state. The balance of how we get our resource wealth out while at the same time we see wise development, then coupled with, and of course something I have the deep love for on environmental issues, is going to be all of our challenges. It's going to be your generation that's going to be really carrying on, but that my generation could so greatly affect. So I'm really hoping that there's a good balance going forward in the state of how to progress. I think that there are many great people here that can carry on, and it's been my joy to be part of this for the last 15 years. And it's really hard to step away, but you know I'm going on to do something I love and to bring back home.
And you describe yourself as an optimist when we first started talking. What
I am.
What do you see for the next 15 years?
Okay, so what I see in the next 15 years is that Alaskans come to understand our state and climate change, which will impact us so heavily in a way that will allow us to not only develop in a wise way so that we can have, we can have the energy across the state that we so badly need, and especially in rural areas, that we can rebuild our education system so that we lead the country and are right up there with Finland as #1 in the world for education, and so that we are able to take advantage of where we are positioned with our ocean state and the Arctic, so that we can really profoundly impact the rest of the world. And food and salmon come into that picture in a great way. So my hope is also something we haven't talked much about, but that we recognize our Alaska Native people in a way that really lets them rise with everyone, with the rest of us, and that their cultures are respected and revered for the amazing cultures that they are. So I guess in my heart, I just want all those good things for Alaska.
Good, that's wonderful. And do you have any advice for the young leaders who come in and fill your shoes?
Yeah, work hard, love what you do, respect everyone, and just keep your eyes open and watch for those things you love, because it really is true. If you get to work on things you love, you'll do a better job.
All right, thank you for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks. This is really wonderful for me. It really feels like it's a way. Thank you very much, Pat Race and Alaska Robotics. No, I mean this. I'm really, today, you can hear my voice, I'm tired. It's been a wonderful week of saying goodbye, and I'll be back soon. But for me, the opportunity to get to do this at the end of my service is really, really an honor and wonderful, and it means I can leave feeling good about getting to say what it was like. Thank you.
Good, and have a wonderful party this evening.
Yeah, come.
I will, yeah.